violence doesn't start out at the beginning of the relationship. It happens years into it, and you're mentally abused by that time, not just when it becomes physical. And then if children are involved, and then if you're not having any family around, let's say you're out of state. So for 8 years, I was out of state with no family. Ended up losing my job and everything because of the domestic violence. But I understand trying to get the victims to come to court, yeah. And I understand if them going back, but a lot of times we didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice till I got back to Chattanooga to get out of it. And as soon as I got back to Chattanooga, that's when it happened again, and I was able to do a restraining order and get out of it then. But if you don't have support, you don't have the support in the community a lot of times, even with the shelters. You have 30 days, and then you're out. Where do you go at that point? Because you're scared to go to work, because you're scared they're gonna find you there. Then you end up unemployed. So really, you're kind of forced to go back into it until you're able to somehow get away from it.
It's a tough situation, like you say. That's why, as a judge, sometimes you don't know what to do, because you like to prosecute, but the victims, through mental coercion or physical intimidation, they're just unable to do it, and that's why I think that the district attorneys take the position they do. We don't want to punish the victim in any way, but at the same time, we can't prosecute the defendant without a person. It's a vicious cycle. I understand that. That's why when I talked to Bobbi, I said this is one of the most difficult problems that we face. And judges, it doesn't matter what, we can't solve it alone, because it involves too many parties, too many people, and we can only adjudicate cases that are in front of us. And when cases are dismissed, there's nothing else that a judge can do.
I know I had mentioned that I worked as an assistant district attorney. I did that for a good while here in Chattanooga before I became a judge. And it was probably in the late 90s that the Domestic Violence Task Force started. And it started with an eye on several issues, but one of the paramount issues of concern to the Domestic Violence Task Force was to educate assistant district attorneys, police officers, even judges to the extent that they could, but particularly the police officers, the responding officers, and the prosecuting attorneys, to think about ways that cases could be prosecuted without the cooperation of the victim, because so many times the perpetrator knows and understands the position that the victim is in from the standpoint of being helpless without that perpetrator being involved, and the hesitancy to come, which, as Judge Wilson said, is just very, very, very commonplace. So the idea was to try to train these responding officers to know and understand that they could develop evidence that could be used in a court of law that would allow the prosecution to go forward without the victim. Now, as a practical matter, if you go to a trial with a jury and the jury doesn't see the victim, then it can make it a lot tougher to prosecute the case. But still, the effort was made. You may want to talk about that, Charlotte.
I was going to ask for the opportunity to talk about evidence-based prosecution, which is, you're right, exactly. We had Casey Gwynn here in Chattanooga who pioneered this in San Diego with their first Family Justice Center, and really pushed evidence-based prosecution. In essence, prosecution's determined, the ability to prosecute is determined by the investigation that you have, that the officer can present as much as it is the testimony of the victim in these cases, because the testimony of the victim is viewed with a skewed eye, almost always, that it's his word against hers, because most of this occurs behind closed doors. It's not done in view of other people, so the people who witness it usually are not, there are not lots of public witnesses to this crime, as there might be a mugging or something that happens in the public. So it required that police officers have an uncommon amount of training. And we sent our officers to the Bureau of Justice model unit, which at that point in time was in Nashville. And they came back, we had probably the best investigative unit in the Southeast at that time, and they did. It was, I talked about this last week, it was a homicide prevention unit. They actually prevented people from dying because they went out and stopped stalkers. They actually gathered evidence. Their evidence was incredible, and they had like a 97% conviction rate. Because when they went, they didn't go to court on a case that they didn't have proof. But they also protected victims in a very direct way that we can't do with our present arrangement with law enforcement. So that unit did meet a very special need. It lasted for 3 years, and then it was disbanded. But evidence-based prosecution is being used in a lot of states, not depending on the victim, understanding that domestic violence is the only crime where the victim goes home to live with the perpetrator. And you can't put somebody, when you ask her to testify, and I say her because most of these cases are male to female, but you're asking her to put a target on her chest when you ask her to come to court and testify. She can't do that if she wants to stay alive, or if she wants to keep her family from being killed, or if she ever wants to see her children again. You're asking her to do something that is practically impossible, and you have to remember that in the meantime, probably over many months and years, she's been brainwashed like a prisoner of war to believe that she cannot make it on her own without him, that she must have him to protect and take care of her, and with the threat that, you know, if you have me arrested, you know, you have no home, you'll have no car, you'll have no income, your children will, you know, you'll be on the street, or I'll take your children away from you. All these threats are used. I'll kill your family. I can tell you because I lived through this. My daughter was a victim and my grandson were victims. So I walked in these shoes. I understand what fear does to the way you live. It changes the way you perceive your world. So that's why there are many reasons why victims recant and why they do not, are unwilling to do this. But by the same token, I think as professionals in the system, we need to be looking at the whole picture of the dynamic that occurs behind closed doors with people. In fact, you just can't take people at face value. I mean, you've got Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde here. That's one of the characteristics of abusers. You've got a person, you've got to understand the mental set here. It's like the criminal mindset is different than the average person who walks on the street. This person usually is sociopathic. And I say this, I have a Ph.D. in, and a lot of years of practice as a therapist. I've, you know, worked with almost every kind of mental cases that you can imagine. And honestly, this person is, they have a criminal mind. And they use the system. They use the judges. They use they know it inside out. They know it better than we do sometimes. They know how to make it work.
So for the victim, I know the last interviews we talked about sometimes the defendant will come and will be dressed up and doesn't look
Right.
like they will do anything.
She's messed and he's in a three-piece suit. He's got the job. He's at home. He's got the health insurance. The kids are in school. Don't want to uproot the kids. Let's just leave the children and they go to the perpetrator.
So
And
there is no
so-
safeguard for like the victim when they come to court. I mean, this person is here and they're intimidating. Is there no?
Oh, yeah, there's safeguards. In fact, now I was talking to somebody today, they actually have a courtroom that is for all the victims to stay in while their cases are pending. It's courtroom 5, which is across the hall. And now on Monday, because this is the designated day for these cases, they have a room, and the district attorneys will keep them there so they are not confronting the defendant, or whatever you want to call him or her, if at all. You know, the case
So
may
they
be
have an option
resolved.
to do that.
Yeah, they stay in there and they don't, you know, they may negotiate with the lawyers or do various things, but this person is segregated. And remember, again, and this is the deceptive thing, there is an order in place in virtually all of these cases where that defendant, a perpetrator is not supposed to be around the victim. We know that this is often ignored, that they go back into this situation for one reason or another, through threats or, that they are often together. But when they come to court, they are kept separate so that they don't have to, confront the person while they're talking to the state, which is not their attorney, but it's the attorney who represents the state. And then the defendant is in court and he has his attorney. So physically, they are most of the time kept separate. And that's a new thing apparently, and I don't know how long that's been going on.
Is
It
that
started in
is that just
January
here?
last year.
Did it?
Is that just here or?
Oh, I don't
Well, it's in
know
many
outside of.
places, many
What's
places.
Yeah, I'm
What's
sure
the
it's not the
best
first
court?
time, we don't.
But Judge Sale actually was very instrumental in
She's done a
establishing
lot,
that.
she has done a
And
lot.
she's done a fantastic job of setting up the domestic violence court.